Hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to On the Inside podcast. We are Sandbox, Sean, Emery, and Nico. Hello again.
Hi.
Sounding
Hello.
rather
Sean, you're
cheerful.
very cheery.
Yeah, considering I just spilled coffee all over my keyboard.
You want to share about your cursing, maybe?
My cursing? Oh no, do I curse?
Of course. Don't we all?
Hey, anyway, welcome to everyone who is joining us. Julia says hi. Hello, Julia. Thank you for joining us. So this is our 5th episode, and every week we explore a different emotion. This week's emotion is anger. And for those of you who are watching on YouTube, you might realize the quality is better because we're now streaming in 1080p. Yeah, and all this is actually thanks to everyone who has supported me on the previous podcast, and you contributed to the 2nd season, and here we are. It's really nice for all of us to be here. If you want to follow up on listen to this podcast on non-video medium, we are also on Spotify. We are also on Apple Podcasts, on wherever you get your podcasts. You will hear, you'll be able to find us there. If you're on Facebook, join us. Follow our page on the Inside Podcast. It is linked right there in the post. Okay. Anger. So I find it quite okay. I like to think that I'm a person who can manage my temper and my anger quite well. I remember when I was a young kid and I was seeing all my friends not all my friends, some of my friends were really angry. They were slamming the table, they were throwing things. And I was like, how come they are so angry and I'm not angry? And there was once somebody said something nasty to me. So I tried to make myself angry. I pushed him against the window. I was hoping that the window would smash. But after that, I was like, that was so unnecessary. That was so fake. But I think, as time went by and you start to grow up and you start to work, you have different, there's so many ways that you could get pissed off. Yeah, and one of the things that's very exciting for us to discuss and talk about was what Emery said at the start, which is cursing. So, well, when I first thought of think of the word, okay, let's not mention that word here, but I remember I was 10 years old and I went back home one night and I was like, oh, mommy, what is? And she's like, "Oi, who tell you one? Who teach you one?" I was like, "Oh, my friend was angry and he just say, no." So I thought it was quite cool. So well, maybe I'll start by sharing my thoughts on cursing. And I think for me, cursing has taken on a different role other than in terms of expressing anger, right? So when you go to the army, at first you think that, oh, everybody, so they're angry with you, that's why they shout F this, F that, F this, F that. And after a while, it just became a way of talking. Yeah, so it's taken a bit of the aggression away from the F word.
Do you mean like a normalizing of the F word?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I still use it to express frustration. I still use it to express dismay, but I also use it to express happiness.
It's a very versatile word, isn't it?
It really is. Well, I would say at the start, before it was so normalized, sometimes when you just shout it out, it allows you to, in some sense, release some frustration. And for me, especially, for those of you who might know, my main sport is squash. And in the game, sometimes when you miss a shot and you get pissed off, under my breath, I would just say, yeah. Yeah, and it kind of helps, right? I don't know, for both of you, do you find that cursing is a way that helps you to relieve a bit of anger, a bit of tension? Nico?
Well, so in France, I'm from France, obviously. So
and you're a meditation teacher.
Right. Yeah, so I would definitely censor myself today. No, so we have the equivalent of the F word in French. We actually use it quite heavily. So many people consider that we even use it as punctuation, pretty much. when we're in like familiar context, when we're with friends and everything. And it's really a whole purpose word to express like frustration, anger, but also like pretty much any kind of emotion. So it's kind of like anger. So that expression anger is just kind of like one option of the many things you can express with that word. So which kind of I feel like kind of normalizes it. So anyone does it, anyone that use it, to express anger, and so it's not that big of a deal. Actually, much less than you would be using the F word in English, maybe, which I think some people would be shocking. So that kind of like make it easy to express like this kind of frustration, and it kind of like flow nicely in a conversation. It means that you can express like frustration and anger, and things don't have to stop right away, and people staring at you, So that's I find that pretty nice, like in terms of like the specificity of the French culture.
Is that a P word? Is that a P word I hear you say sometimes?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is just
exposed.
Yeah. Except in French, we don't say P word because you would just say the word. No one cares, right? So, yeah. So, and that might actually have led me to. I don't actually recall specific incident, but I suspect that might have led me to use the equivalent, the F word, a bit too liberally, maybe when I was in the US. And so I spent like a year and a half in the south of the US, where people are very proper about the way they use language, and that. So yeah, there's a couple of times where people would give me those like shocked stares after I like utter like a F word or like which to me was totally normal, but that was just really a no-go. So I thought, okay, maybe I should just dial it down a bit. The F word
and use the F word there when you were pissed off at something.
I don't remember a specific story, but yeah, I especially remember. Yeah, there was one incident when I was with someone who was involved in a religious congregation. So pretty big deal. It was an informal kind of dinner because his son was in my class. So then they were interested in France, so they invited me for dinner and stuff. But then, so then I used the F word during the dinner, and that just didn't. That didn't. Like I didn't. They actually, we kind of lost touch after that, right? So, anyways, that was my story.
Amerie, F words.
Okay,
a way to help you relieve anger.
I guess, bearing in mind, I do work with young kids, so we got to be careful here. But okay, my personal exposure to that word was in probably primary school or secondary school, late primary or early secondary school. I remember, when we were first exposed to that word, it felt like a cool thing, right? Back in the day, I remember I got one of my first CDs, Alanis Morissette, Jagged Little Pill. I don't know if you guys know about it. It was way back. I mean, I'm risking, revealing my age here, but I'm 21, by the way. So, so back in the day, she had this album, and I wanted to buy it because there was this track with that, F word in there, and I was like, okay, this is really cool. I need to have it, right? Just even for me to feel good about it. My mom bought it for me without realizing. But yeah, I mean, it was actually pretty decent. It was a good album. I didn't regret that. So that was my first experience with that. And I just wanted to share that actually I've come across studies that advocate for the use of cursing. Right? I've come across studies saying that cursing is actually beneficial for health. It helps to tolerate with, I guess, experiences of pain better. It's better to let it out than to suppress, apparently. And personally, in my own sort of experiences, certainly sometimes letting go, letting a bit of steam out, right, could be quite cathartic compared to, just trying to hold it all in.
So it's a coping mechanism and a way to build resilience, I guess.
Yeah, actually, some studies did suggest that building resilience, right? I mean, I guess, if you did compare it with really suppressing emotions, maybe being, a bit more controlled in cursing might not be a bad thing. Of course, we don't want to be doing it, all the time. I mean, if you have a bit of a potty mouth, the effects might not be as powerful.
So when it comes to cursing, then I mean, it's one of the ways that people express their anger. It's one of the ways that people express their frustration. Do you think that there are good ways? And I don't know. I would suppose, is there a good way to relieve yourself of anger, or are they like just maybe? Because I mean, when you think about the way that people release these frustrations, it feels like you link it to a lot of aggression. You link it to a lot of, in some sense, maybe violence. Yeah. Do you think there are good ways of relieving anger?
Of course. Of course. I mean, I'm just thinking about all these times I have been really mad. Actually, when I'm really angry, I'm very eloquent. I write really good emails, really well-formed words. I don't know how, but I take a lot of pride in writing angry emails because it helps me, process my thoughts and feelings. And interestingly, by the end of, a very angry email, I usually feel a lot better. Of course, I got to edit the email and make sure it actually reads okay. But sometimes anger helps you focus, right? And I find it to be quite a powerful thing. And another example that comes to mind is this was way back when I was maybe in my early 20s. Okay, not so way back. All right. And then I was on a train and I remember this was before, there was signages on how we're encouraged to give up our seats to the elderly. Right. I remember it was on, there was this old lady with bags of stuff and, the whole train was full. And there was this young man, right? He was sitting there. He saw her, pretended she didn't exist. And I got really mad, right? She obviously was struggling. And I felt like, he could do something. And I remember feeling really frustrated. And I called him out on that. And I was like, I think you need to let the lady sit down. I mean, she's, struggling with the bags. And he ignored me. And he pretended to read his papers, but then he held the papers upside down. So I knew he wasn't really reading. And that got me more frustrated. So in the end, I couldn't do much because, I tried and he obviously wasn't budging and that was his right. And the old lady was really nice. She thanked me for trying. But even so, it was so hard to let that anger go. Yeah, so I remember going home and I probably had to run it off or something like that because it was, something that I couldn't resolve in that situation.
Wow. And no one else like sensed that frustration that you were going through and it's like, just somebody else on the entire row of seats just give up your seat or something?
Yeah, no one did. This was way before. There was a bit of a culture to give up your seat. And I guess it wasn't something that a lot of people might automatically stand up for. I don't know. I mean, I don't quite remember anymore. Right. I guess there were also others who were standing, who were looking over, but no one else intervened. Which was, I guess, in the context, well, it added more to my frustration as well. Yeah. That I was alone in this, where's the sense of justice here? Yeah. So it was for me, it was unresolved. I mean, there was nothing else I could do, right? Except to try and dissipate that energy on my own later in the day.
Yeah, it's interesting because a friend had a similar story. And because what comes up first when you say that is that like the next step would be then violence, right? And if you were to have to go further, you have no choice than to actually do something to that person.
Probably.
And so that's what happened to a friend, and actually managed in a way that was pretty nice. So it's a bit, there's some similarities you'll see. So he was buying a magazine. And it was early in the morning when kind of like everyone's rushing to work. So people, it was a few years back, people were like queuing to buy a newspaper. And there was like maybe 8 or 10 people in the queue. So pretty long queue, slow going, everyone rushing for work. And he was at the end of the queue. And there's this guy who come with a very nice suit, kind of like busy executive, middle-aged, like that just focus on what he has to do, take his magazine and straight up and walk straight at the top of the queue, and just put in magazine in front of the shop attendant, expecting for the shop attendant to just let him cut the queue like that. And the shop attendant was so taken aback, so he would just he didn't know what to do. And so my friend was like, that cannot be. That's not right. And so no one was doing anything in the queue. So people right behind you were not responding at all. So what he did, so he was obviously angry. What he did, he just walked up to the front of the queue, took the magazine like the guy has gotten from the desk, and just slammed it on the floor. And he said, you go back, you go at the back of the queue. And the guy, so that's an example where, it just resulted to a form of like physical action. Didn't hit him, and it worked actually. The guy had to bend down to get his magazine, and he went back to the back of the queue. Yeah.
Well, at least the guy, was able to be receptive to that action. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's hard to do though. It's hard to do. Yeah. But I think that sometimes it's important when you have when people are not responding to do something that's graded. That makes sense. That's not obviously overtly violent. Because even though people, they don't seem to support you as you're being verbal, if you see something that kind of like punishes that behavior somehow, like, in the example of the magazine, you'll get that support. Like it go both ways. You get what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because people know what's right, even if they're not actually doing anything about it, I believe.
Yeah.
Yeah. You think getting angry is a good way to deal with problems? So everyone has problems, right? And some things piss you off more than others. And there is obviously this talk where people would say, should you even start getting angry, or should you just, take a structured way of dealing with things so that you don't even get angry? I mean,
like prevent anger.
I would suppose yes. Before letting it get to the stage where you are really on the verge of doing something that you might regret. Yeah, but I mean, essentially, do you think getting angry is an effective way of dealing with problems?
I think, I would probably see anger in a quite different way. I think anger on its own is not a good or bad emotion, but I think you're talking about the degree of anger, right? Do we allow anger to escalate into something like rage, something uncontrollable? Yeah, I mean, of course, if we can, it's great to be able to take steps to manage that before it gets worse, right? But to stop anger, I don't know how realistic that is, because I honestly think that, if you are passionate about something, right, there is no way you can say that, oh, you will never feel angry, right? Because anger is when something you care about, you're passionate about, it's well, I wouldn't say it's not right, but then, perhaps something you believe in is not carried through. Perhaps, something you believe in is violated. And if you're passionate about that, of course you can't have a situation where you never feel angry.
So you can't just let it go.
Yeah, I mean, like, if I care about something, right, and if someone damages that thing I care about, I will get upset. I will get angry, right? Because I care about that thing, right? If I care about, for instance, say, maybe a young child I'm working with, right? I mean, this is more in a work context, right? And if someone hurts the child, I mean, I think there's the natural reaction where I feel like, oh, why is someone hurting that child deliberately? In a context of, say, friends or family, right? If someone does something to hurt them, I will get angry because I care.
Nico, anger, a good way to deal with problems?
Yeah. So, yeah. So, okay. To me, okay. So in meditation, we train in that skill. We try to train that skill where you can observe what's going on. And so that then you learn that, okay, you can, if you want to, you can have that phase before you start acting on something, where you just watch what's going on. So typically meditation, of course, as you would know, right, that would be about watching what's going on inside you. But that can also be about watching what's going on outside you. And so for me, anger can be that moment where it's the emotion is there, and I don't see really a good reason to try to make it go away other than it's unpleasant. So of course, but my point is, like, I think it's really helpful to develop some kind of ability to stay with the unpleasantness of the anger, because there's like almost like energy in anger, you see. So it's kind of like, for me, it's already like it's more like a preparation time. So we tend to think of like anger as like, oh, I experience anger and I'm going to hit back. I'm going to get back of that person, whatever way, whatever that might look like. But actually, it's mostly about, it's nice to let it simmer. You see what I mean? And just look at it as a preparation phase where you kind of like, ideas pop up about what you're going to do to that person, what you're going to say. And you might have really, really bad ideas, like maybe hitting the person in the face for something for which is really not warranted, or, but you may also get very skillful ways of dealing with the conflict or the harm that happened, I feel. But you need to, I feel like, at least for me, like I need to let that time where I feel the anger and I don't respond right away. Yeah. And I remember in a work situation, I had some issue in a work situation. And essentially that was about who would be taking responsibility for work that had been done. And so someone was being one of our collaborators was that was in an academic context. But someone was being very, very aggressive in terms of taking responsibility for every single thing that was getting done, essentially. And so that made me so angry at some point that I didn't know how to respond. And so like I spent like a couple of sleepless nights, pretty much like not knowing how to deal with it and just being angry. And then on the third day, I just sat down and write an email to my supervisor to explain like what I thought the issue was. And the email was just nice. It was the best email I've ever even written.
Right,
and
right. Eloquence. That's exactly what I said.
Yeah. And frankly, I showed it to friends, and they were like, "Well, that sounds like a UN Security Council resolution." It was like, and I don't write like that. It was this whole page thing, and I sent it to her, and it was actually quite effective. So just laying out what I saw was, the responsibility of each person that was involved, and what I thought that was not right for the person to take responsibility. And she did take action on the basis of that email because she had material to do that, and it was just, it was then not just a burst of anger. It was really structured, and she could work from that. And for that, I credit that time I took to process it properly. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it's a lot about how you respond to anger, rather than react. Because I think in the heat of the moment, we could do things we regret. But if we wait it out just a little bit, sometimes it could really be quite powerful in, say, crafting great emails.
I think even in a work sense or even in a personal sense, it's like for me when it comes to work, right? I'm pissed off over something. There was once early in my career, I was organizing the dinner and dance for my company. I was chairing the committee, and suddenly they took out my vice chairperson to handle some other thing. I was so pissed off. I wrote an email to quite a lot of directors in the company, and including the general manager, including a lot of people, right? And I was like, I want him back in my committee now. Yeah. And then after that, my direct superior, my area manager, called me and essentially coached me on the whole thing and said, there is a way to handle these things. You can't send emails out to all the directors like that. And I'm like, why cannot? Yeah, I think what that taught me really was at the point where I am angry, I need to take a step back and just not make it a point not to react immediately. right? Because I think, especially if you are the type of person that's able to express yourself, and people express themselves in different ways, right? Some people, there's a physical outburst of emotion or action, and some people can say very hurtful or piercing things. Some people can write really powerful emails in every sense of the word. Yeah, so I've learned to take a step back, at least for myself. And I think on the personal side, also, when I had my past relationships, and when things make me very upset, I really just I tend to keep quiet for a while and give myself time before I react, because if I say things immediately, firstly, there's a chance I'll regret what I say. Secondly, I think it's one thing to regret the action, but the effects of it is something you might have to deal with for like a really long time. Yeah. The other thing that came to my mind as both of you were doing your sharing on, some of the good things about anger and how I've used anger to help me, it's in terms of performance, right? And I first learned this, unsurprisingly, through squash in competition. And the anger allows you to be so focused on achieving a particular aim. For me, I was so angry that I lost to this kid who was younger than me. I told myself at that point, I will never lose to anyone younger than me. Again, yeah, I mean, we've moved on pretty far from that time. So.
But it's allowed. That's fine. That's allowed. You're allowed to feel that.
But I mean, that soul emotion that drives you so much to that I absolutely hated to lose at that point. I'm quite competitive, but I absolutely hated to lose, and that anger gave me the kind of aggression to keep pushing on. And yeah, I suppose that was the first time that people that I got to understand that okay, there's actually something good about anger, if you can use it the right way. Yeah, there are other times where it didn't work out so well. I was angry because I think when I was 13 or 14 years old, there was a girl that I liked, and the girl didn't like me back. So I went to the squash courts, played 6 or 8 hours straight, keep hitting the ball nonstop. And I was like, wow, that was such a great way to vent anger. Yeah, after that, I got injured and couldn't play for the next 3 to 4 weeks. So
Karma.
Yeah, but I mean, at the end of the day, I think it's about how you deal with the situation at hand, and also how you manage those emotions. People have different ways of expressing their anger and their frustration, and I'm sure in your work you've seen that, and maybe it's something you could share with us. I could share like some of my experience working with the kids that I speak to. So I used to work with a lot of kids who got caught smoking. And at some point in time, I realized that smoking, the action of smoking itself, it's just an expression of a lot of things that are happening, and sometimes it's really an expression of anger, of disappointment, of stress, and really, if they are able to manage their emotions in terms of anger a lot better, then they don't have to smoke. Yeah, I mean, in your careers or in your work, have you seen like different ways or interesting ways that people express their anger?
Interesting ways.
Yes, unique ways. I mean, yeah.
I won't call them unique, but then they are quite self-destructive, I would say. I mean, a lot of times, I think individuals who struggle with anger tend to be quite self-destructive. At least, in the individuals I work with,
You mean
sometimes it
self-harm?
could be self-harm. Yeah. Sometimes externalizing behaviors. So maybe wanting to hurt someone else because they feel so angry at the world. But I find that underneath anger, there's usually a very soft, vulnerable emotion. They often feel emotions like shame or hurt. And anger is kind of that protective layer. It's kind of secondary to that very raw emotion underneath. And once you can help them access that soft, raw emotion, often the anger kind of dissipates, right? And what they really want to experience is, this feeling of being seen and heard. Yeah, and you got to peel away the angry layer to help them access that.
And what does it mean actually? Like how do you do something like that? Like peeling away the angry layer?
With a lot of patience, right? And realizing that you don't have to react to the anger. Because a lot of times you bring a lot of anger with them, there's a lot of reactivity in the room, right? And you have to be able to tolerate that distress yourself to be able to help them see that actually, there is something else underneath going on. Because if you react to their reactivity, if you can't sit with that distress and you get, maybe anxious at their anger, right, then, you're essentially just reacting. And what you're trying to help them do is, to respond instead of react. Because when you help to calm them down, that's also when they're able to go, okay, actually there's something else going on for me, right? Because if you're constantly in that reactive mode, it's very hard for them to hear or listen to what you have to say.
Nico,
Yeah.
in terms of, go on.
Yeah. So I think, well, yes, whatever I'm going to say is going to go in the same direction. It's just that often my experience of people, when they come to meditation, often they try to, I mean, there's a sense of like you're trying to feel good. You go, you don't want to feel. So there's always like a kind of a bias where people sometimes don't want to feel. They come at meditation with already some personal strategy to not feel any negative emotion and not feel anger when they're angry, for instance. And so the way we do that, and we all do that sometimes, we might be in a setting where, feeling very angry might be distracting if we're talking with someone, and the way you can do that is through tensing up. So, and that kind of, because meditation is a work with relaxation, you get to find out about those tension. And often you get surprised by the kind of emotions that are underneath there, that those kind of, tension maybe in the chest or in the belly or kind of dissimulating. And when with relaxation, you realize that people sometimes come up with anger. Yeah, and they just feel spontaneous anger. They don't understand where it's coming from because they might have already forgotten or has been buried for so long. And so it's really the same idea what Amerie was sharing about that kind of like unlayering, removing those layers. And for many people, removing those layers of tension that allow us to not feel like old anger. Then you reach the anger. And then once you're there, well, it's kind of, I think for most of us, what can be useful is just to try to care for that anger. Try to get a sense of like, okay, why, like you would for a child, imagine a child that you don't know well, you never seen, comes to you really angry. You're going to be approaching it with maybe some compassion for some of us, but definitely some kind of curiosity, and be asking questions. So why are you angry? What is it? And especially, you're allowed to be angry. You can be angry. And then through that kind of like questioning and curiosity, slowly, that's when you can get to what Amerie was talking about, which is like the first emotion that's below the anger, that maybe a hurt often, or something unpleasant, a sense of loss. There might be many different things. And to go back to what we said earlier, I feel like what's really, especially in relationship, I would say, what's really helpful to be able to respond when we're angry, it's to get in touch with that other emotions that are down there. Because we might be angry in a situation, for instance, and maybe we investigate a bit and we find out that, oh, that's because our partner or friend said something, for instance, that felt condescending and that hurt us somehow, or that did something that hurt us in a way. And getting to that hurt, that's why you can say, oh, I'm feeling like that way because you did that. And then maybe have an open discussion about actually what was the behavior, as opposed to, oh, you've been mean, without the ability to explain to the person exactly what effect it had on you. That doesn't make sense. So I feel it's more powerful to actually respond in relationship when you're able to say why and how you got hurt. But yeah, to be able to do that, you need to accept the anger and then dive in and see what's below it. I don't know if that
So
makes
it's
sense,
about
but
so it's about being able to justify, like to ask yourself, oh, what exactly am I angry about?
yeah.
Why am I angry?
Yes, because I feel unless you know that, I don't see how you can effectively talk to someone else about the way they've hurt. You need to know first how you've been hurt to make sure it won't happen again. Otherwise, you don't know what's going on. Does that make sense? I mean, you know you're angry, but you might not really know deeply why it's hurtful, for instance.
So what are some ways that would have been useful for you, both of you, in terms of coping with these feelings of anger? For me, squash is just one way, but I mean the other way that has been very effective for me is actually writing, journaling. So those of you who know me would probably know that I think by now I must have had 13, 14 books of diaries already.
Wow.
Yeah. But one of the things that I notice in my diaries is that the nature of the entries are largely entries of frustration. There are not as many entries where, I'm so happy today and I wanted to remember this. It's very little of that. It's all those, why doesn't she like me? That kind of post, right? That kind of writing. And and I find that writing things out it makes me have to explain the thoughts. And that
So
in
were you
some way,
also eloquent in your diaries?
well, I had to find a way to express that feeling. So it's like, sometimes when I do classes or I do speeches, and sometimes people say, oh, how come you're able to explain yourself so well? Well, actually, really, it just stems from being able to, because I wrote diaries and I had to find a way to express my own thoughts and my own emotions. If not, it doesn't feel as good, right? Like it's not about tearing up the paper. It's about, writing something in. It could be in a very aggressive handwriting, right? Compared to like when I'm calm and it's neater and stuff like that, if I was ever neat. But yeah, I think I felt like writing was one of the ways that was very effective for me. What are some ways that have been effective for you, Emery?
Yeah, I mean, the eloquent emails had been, I guess similar, right? The power of words. Because like I said earlier, there is something about, I guess writing that helps you to process what's happening.
But isn't but that
it's
would be something that it would be very professional based, right? Because you have someone to respond to.
not just in a professional context. I mean, even if you think about, say, writing a text, things like that, or I mean, writing to a friend to explain what was going on, right? Not necessarily to, the person who was making you upset in the first place. Or I think, for me, what's helpful is having a few close friends on speed dial, right? Because if you need to sometimes just talk it out, that always helps for me. If that's not accessible, usually it's some form of exercise, because I find that getting my heart rate up does help to alleviate that physical energy that you get from anger. Yeah, sometimes even just cold water does wonders for me. Yeah, but if I have to have a go-to, it would be friends.
And how much is it about you expressing it to them versus the reply that you get from them?
I think it's a bit of both. I mean, my close friends, I'm very grateful. They're all very validating, very supportive. When you go, I'm so angry, to go, yeah, you should be. That's, it normalizes your anger, right? It makes you feel like, they understand why, and it makes sense, right? And when you feel seen, when you feel heard, it helps to dissipate the emotion already, right? Because I think sometimes that's just what it is. Emotions just give you some clues that something's not going okay, and what you really need then is some comfort and to be seen and to be heard. So when you have friends who validate you, I think, you know, yeah, that takes the whole intensity away from anger. Yeah, and also being able to talk about it.
And if a person were to, you know, receive such messages from a good friend, and if they disagreed with that, why are you even angry over something like that? What's a good way to respond, you think?
If they disagree, well,
Yeah,
they
like
don't have
what
to.
you shouldn't even why are you even angry about something so small or something so, or like it could be a case of it's actually your fault. Why are you angry?
If that were the case, I don't know. I mean, because usually I don't know, it's probably our friendships, maybe. But it's, you know, typically I feel really supported. And suppose there is such a scenario where we don't agree with, you know, the role of anger. I think it's still important to validate the anger, but you don't have to agree with the situation itself, if that makes sense. I mean, sometimes just, you know, being reflected, having anger reflected. So for instance, you know, I can see you're really angry, and I see that, you know, that whatever happened upset you. Doesn't mean I agree with, you know, how it actually got you angry, or I agree that you should be angry, but I could see that you have this experience because you felt a certain way, right? And that itself is validation. It's not about, you know, saying that, oh, I will feel exactly the same as you.
Right, Nico. You cope with anger through friends as
How
well,
do I
or
cope
meditation?
with- no, I don't cope with anger through meditation because I don't like to. Yeah, so just yeah, because that would mean that I might fall into the trap of trying to use meditation to feel better
Yeah.
instead of using meditation to feel really what is it going on with me right now. And these are different things. So I think when we're trying to use meditation or like anything else, actually, you know, if you think of maybe you're talking about smoking earlier, but you know, any kind of addiction to feel better, then we're losing an opportunity to really see what's going on with us and to learn more about, you know, our needs and what's just generally what's going on with us, but also who we are, you know, what our value are, what our needs are, and so on. But there's a place for meditation, that said, but my go-to thing would be walking. Yeah, because like I just go for a walk, and then what he does is that he doesn't. I mean, it's not the case that the anger would go away, but when I experience a strong emotion, I tend to go in my head very quickly. So then things start spinning, and I go down like several like garden paths, like scenarios about what I might be doing next, and it's pretty curious. Pretty quickly, it turns into like reruns, like over and over the same stories. So like I feel like walking gets me back into my body. Like I really get to feel the energy in the body, feel the anger in the body, and that's where then from there things seems to unlock. Like I get new perspective. You know, I get out of my repetitive ideas, and I can get new perspective, new things going on. And I think it's also a good place to like start maybe working or exploring in a way that I suggested earlier. Like, you know, trying to see, okay, why am I hungry? What's my what need is not being met, or what kind of boundary has been violated, or whatever that means, you know. So I think once I'm out of my head and inside that body, it's really a good place to try to feel take that moment we talked about, you know, where you kind of process first before you prepare for what's going to be the response. Yeah. When there need to be a response, and that's the main thing. And I do talk with friends, so I do involve friends, but usually I involve friends to check on my response. Meaning, once I have a first draft of the email, that's when I call up my friends. You know, hey, you mind reading up that email and give me some feedback? Yeah, and I'm like, oh, maybe you should turn down that thing, or just drop that paragraph. Yeah. That's the stage where I need someone to, like, you know, reflect back to me on whether that makes sense, or whether I was blowing stuff out of proportion in terms of my response or whatever. Yeah.
So it seems like the three of us, I mean, the way that we generally cope with anger is either you express it or you calm yourself down. Is suppression ever a good way to cope?
What do you mean by suppression?
Suppressing, keeping it inside and just like not doing anything about it. And at some point, letting it dissipate on its own naturally.
Okay, can I suggest? Yeah, maybe Amerie can say more after that. But what I would like to say is that sometimes it's fine for. I mean, like we shouldn't be judging ourselves because we're suppressing our anger.
Mhm.
So there's moments where you have no choice but to suppress your anger. Like for instance, if you know, for example, the example you gave earlier about not emailing every single director in a company. Because I mean, the first time around, that's fine. You're learning the ropes, I mean, and so you just figure out things, But further on in the career, it's just you lose your job for things like that, or you might. I mean, depends what kind of environment you need. But my point is like sometimes an ability to suppress anger is really very important. Yeah, but I feel like you need to know that you're doing it. I think it's useful to get to allow yourself to do it and also know that you're doing it. Yeah, and see what are the options, and again, maybe talk to people about what's going on, but yeah, I want to start by saying that's okay to do it, and sometimes we don't have a choice; we have to do it. Yeah.
But is that suppressing anger or suppressing a reaction?
I mean, I think it might be both. Primarily, of course, suppressing a reaction. But sometimes you do have to suppress anger. I mean, you cannot just, because it will show, right? I mean, you're in a meeting with someone, with a bunch of people, and you're angry. It will show in the tone of voice you use, or you will fall into like passive aggressive behavior that people will like pick up on. So sometimes you do actually need to, I feel, suppress the emotion itself, so you can function in a way that's present, in a way that's just staying polite, staying open when you need to. I feel sometimes it's necessary. Yeah. But it's not, to be clear, it's not really ideal most of the time. But I like to acknowledge the fact that sometimes we don't have a choice. Yeah.
Yeah, I find it really hard to suppress. I mean, usually what works better for me is transforming. So let's say if I'm really angry at someone, right? And I feel like, okay, it's really hitting all the right buttons. I try to find something good about the person I could hold on to.
Wow.
Yeah. So I'm just like, okay, she's like this because,
Oh.
she just cares for something. I don't know. It's hard, right? But I find that it's more helpful for me than trying to suppress, because knowing me, it's probably a lot harder. Transforming is probably slightly easier, I would say.
Yeah, one of the things that I tell my staff sometimes when they are angry with some of their bosses, and which is essentially the leadership team, one of the first things I tell them to do is to look for common ground, and I'll say like, okay, so firstly understand that the reason why the other person is acting in that way is because we all want the company to succeed, right? The way that we express our ideas might come across as in a way that pissed you off, but just understand and agree first that we are doing all of this because for the benefit of the company, right? And then later we go on to talk about all the other stuff. And I find that when you realize that you have common ground, yeah, it tends to take away a bit of that tension, I would say. The reason why you are angry, probably it's still unresolved, right? But at least it prevents an initial outburst in some way. Yeah. So maybe since we all deal in some form of mental health in our work, at what point do you think that it's important for someone to seek help? Because it's easy. It's become a point where some people say, I have a very bad temper, or I have anger management issues. But at what point is it necessary to seek professional help?
When it becomes very interfering with your life, I guess. Because that's also when you start noticing it becomes a problem, right? I mean, we all get angry. But then if it becomes, significantly interfering with your life, you find that, it's getting out of hand, you can't control, it's affecting your sleep, your eating, and people around you are just getting frustrated at you. I mean, that's a clear sign that you probably need some help.
And normally I would suppose people try to handle it on their own. Yeah. And that involves like different kinds of methods. I mean, I'm sure on the internet there are plenty of ways that people tell you how to cope with your anger. Meditation is one of them. I've seen it. It's just one of those things that I struggle with to try to explain to my clients sometimes. Like, at this point, this is the exact point where you need to go out and seek help. And I find that it's not easy. Perhaps it's the stigma of, coming forward to say I need help for something. But I think part of it is they can't differentiate at the situation they are in, whether it warrants professional help. Yeah, it's just, it's not easy to explain to them and convince them.
It is hard because I think usually, these individuals might present only if people around them, like close ones, get really frustrated at their anger issues, right? Because if you think about it, anger is a very powerful emotion. It puts you in action. And when you're the one in charge in a situation, because you're charged up, it's sometimes hard for you to see that it's actually a problem. It's people around you who actually witness or bear the brunt of maybe a very angry reaction, because they might, get hurt or get upset. And, they would be the ones saying, hey, you know what, this is an actual issue. You need to deal with it.
Okay. All right. We are almost approaching the hour already. Okay. So I guess how we would end it as we typically end our sessions. Any final thoughts that you like to share on this topic of anger? I mean, we did speak a bit about the good things that could come out of anger, and as well as some of the challenges. And largely, it seems to me, at least, that it's a lot about managing the reaction. Understanding how you react to anger, and I would suppose to pause for a while and to see, before you actually react, especially if you know that you're the kind that can react in a very potentially damaging way. Yeah. Well, that's at least that's how I cope with it, and I just pause. I'll just like stop. Yeah. And any final thoughts?
Know your triggers. I think that's important.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And largely violation of values, some of those triggers.
Values, yeah. And, maybe certain types of, I don't know, situations that might really get to you. I think it's important to know your triggers, because, then you start noticing patterns.
Nico, final thoughts on anger?
Yeah. Maybe that it's a good signal to explore. Like, I feel like when we experience anger, something important is happening. And so it's if we are able to care for ourselves, we should really be interested in the important things that are happening to us and why they're happening. So you mentioned values. So, often, that what's behind anger, it could be some of your values have been violated or been, and then those values you might not be aware of. So that's an opportunity to learn about your values. So you're able to really, use them to build a vision for yourself and, and bring them to life in a way that's even more empowering, I would say. The other thing that you might find behind anger is like a need hasn't been met.
Mm.
And I feel it's really great to know about your needs because you're able to share them with others better. And or if you don't like to do that, you can, take care of yourself and, make sure that your needs are being met. That might mean change job, that might mean change relationship, that could mean change the place where you're living. That could be a million of things for different people. But that might really lead to really some important or even like beautiful and life-changing choices and yeah.
So it's self-love.
Yeah, I think so actually. Like pausing and investigating the anger when it's possible, when it's available with the help of someone or with friends, as we said. Yeah, you can. It's not. It is a form of self-love, and it's also you get tools to love yourself even better, right? You learn by your value, you learn by your needs, and then with those you can really care for yourself better. I feel. Yeah.
Okay.
A compassionate way to anger.
Yeah.
All right. So we've come to the hour mark. Thank you for the 5 people who are still here listening to us. It's 11:30 in Singapore, almost midnight. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure having this conversation, and drop us a note in the comments.
Show my anger T-shirt.
Oh, did you?
Yeah. Wait.
Yeah.
Wait. Can you see? So it's like this kind of like angry. Kind of make out the like 2 eyes, the mouth, kind of like this angry monster thing.
Cool.
Anyway,
Cool.
a bit abstract, but yeah, I thought that. That's all. Thank you.
Bye, everyone. We'll see you 2 weeks later for our 6th episode and a new emotion we'll discuss. Right. See you guys in 2 weeks. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Take care.